But I really appreciate each of you guys being here, and I know our church does too. So the vast majority of our church, this may be shocking to you guys, the vast majority of our church is white.
No.
So Jason, have you ever noticed that when you're on stage?
I didn't know that.
Barely.
When you're singing, when you're leading worship, have you noticed that?
A little bit.
So I really love the fact that, and I've told you this so many times privately, but just your willingness to kind of sit and talk and be so honest, with people. I mean, I don't know if it's even easy to be honest with me, but, to do it on camera, on video, that stuff, that's a lot harder. So I really appreciate you doing that. And the reason we want to do this is because as a Jesus follower, we really want to follow well. And following well means loving people the way Jesus has loved people. And it's really hard to stand with people if you don't understand people. That's almost impossible, right? There was one verse I wanted to read just to kind of get us going. Paul wrote this in Philippians. He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather," and here's our probably word for the night, "in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others." So, empathy really begins with interest, because and interest begins with humility. And so if we want to be humble, we've got to be interested in each other and interested in our stories and even why we think or feel the way we feel, And so let me ask one question to kind of get us going. And it's a question for Woodstock City, because the vast majority of Woodstock City doesn't look like you guys. It look like me. Right. And so the question for all the people watching who look like me is this. Is it possible that because I am white, there are some racial dynamics that I just can't see? Is it possible because I'm white that there are some racial dynamics happening that I'm just ignorant to? Not as a bad thing, I'm just oblivious. I just don't know. I just don't see it.
Gavin, I think really to kind of even start that, answering that question maybe as you're posing it to those out there, what did you think when you started this group, or when you started wanting to meet with us? What did you think about us maybe individually, but just as a people group, black people? Yeah. What were some of your thoughts?
So I thought I was going to ask all the questions.
Yeah, that's why I set up. I'm listening. Yeah.
So what did I think when we started this? Well, I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, right? We, I guess it was almost a year ago, almost in July of last year, I did a series on empathy. And I asked a question to our church. What is it like to not be you? Because we all know what it's like to be us, but we very rarely, and really it's a humility issue, right? We very rarely reach out to see what it's like to be somebody else. And we're called to love people the way Jesus has first loved us, which is unconditionally. Right. I just felt like if I'm going to ask people to do that, I need to do that. And there's a whole bunch of groups of people who don't look like me. And I thought, you know what? I grew up in an area where it was pretty racially diverse. I grew up in Riverdale. I've told you guys that.
Oh, yeah.
And, but even though I had some black friends and had some black enemies, I mean, I don't know that I ever thought about what it was like to be black. And so I asked a couple of you guys to invite a friend who I might not know. That's how I met Stephen, who I just love to death. But I said, hey, invite a couple of people I don't know, and let's get together. And I just want to have a conversation so I can maybe try to pastor our church better, so I can lead better, when we're creating messages, so I can make sure it's as inclusive as possible, And but I didn't know what to think. I was more worried about what you were going to think about me, honestly. Like, this white guy just wants to ask me, check off a box. He asked a black man a question. Now he can say he did it,
Yeah, I've got a question, too, while we're asking questions. So when I first got, we spoke in here. We spoke in the green room. We were talking. And at the end of our conversation, you said, hey, I'm thinking about sitting down with some guys who don't look like me, who may have a different perspective. And I always want to know, what was your intention? What was your motive? What were your reasons behind doing it?
Man, motive is an important question for everything we do. I can honestly say that my motive was not to check a box. I try so hard to do this job as well as I can. And I know that there are lots of people who look like you guys in this community who might not feel comfortable in a church like Woodstock City, and that's my fault. I need to do something about that. And so for me to engage in a relationship, and I was really hopeful it'd be more than one meeting, you know. But for me to engage in a relationship that went deeper than just a meeting, to get to know each other, to get to understand our stories, to ask really hard questions, you know, of each other, I just thought out of your grace, that would help me be better at leading people to Jesus.
Do you think beyond the fact of you being a pastor and leading people to Jesus, that there was a deeper, like, I know you want to be a better pastor.
Yeah.
But what about being a better person?
You know, okay, so that wasn't on. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that part yet. Yes, but not at first. If I'm really honest, I didn't think as much about I need to be a better person. I'm already a good person. I mean, good grief, I'm a pastor. So I'm already a good person. Which, by the way, I'm not as good as people probably think. But I'm already a good person. I need to learn how to be better at this job. So that when one of you guys walks in, you feel comfortable. And when you meet me, I have a better understanding of maybe some of your emotion around things. Or even when we're preaching, you know. But it didn't take long for that to change. Because I went in with an agenda to become better for this community. And about probably three meetings in, I thought, this is less about me being a better pastor. This is more about me being a better human, and more about me just being a better person, and more about me being able to better love my neighbor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that really was a shift in me. Like, it really did, it shifted. I hope in a positive way. You know?
So what about, I'm curious, so, you know, you're asking about specifically, are there things that, you know, that we think that perhaps white people just aren't aware of? I'm curious to know, as you're going into a room, you know that there's gonna be 4, 5, 6, however many, like, you're gonna be the minority, if you will. What goes through your head, and what were you thinking before? How did you feel walking into even as you said, that, oh my goodness, everyone seems to know each other and they just seem to have a bond that I don't seem to have.
Oh, he was sweating.
Like,
I remember Gavin was sweating.
What do you, because honestly, if by answering that, I think that almost is kind of leeway into, well, what do we think about whether or not white people think this stuff just doesn't exist?
I thought the first time I walked in the room, well, first you were all late.
See, here we go. Here we go.
I was there on time, and you were all late.
Late is relative.
Casually.
Yes. Late.
Right. Casually.
You guys.
Some habits die hard.
Use that as an excuse, but late. But whatever. I was there on time. Ken was there on time. I don't know where you guys. Anyway, you all showed up 20 minutes in. I was kidding. No, when we all got there. We met at a coffee shop. We went into this room at the coffee shop that was glass. Remember, it has glass. You know,
it was like a fish
walls.
tank. Yeah.
It was like a fish tank,
Yes.
right? And I remember you guys were laughing at me. You were at the end of the meeting. Remember one of you said, "I can't believe another white person didn't poke their head in there and ask you if you were okay."
What do you need?
Right? Yeah. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Yeah. So, no, I probably was sweating a little bit, but I probably walked in thinking, I'm going to ask these guys to show me a lot of grace. And I'm going to ask hard questions, and this is going to be their opportunity to be angry. That's what I thought.
You know what's funny though? A lot of people feel like that, and I think it's something that we don't feel that way. So it's an unrequited feeling. Some white people, even black people, we're afraid to have that conversation because we expect all the venom and all of the weight from the past to land on us because we happen to be the one on duty. Right? And it's not like that. Like we talked about last time, you got to take that step and don't carry a burden that you didn't earn.
I mean, so like there's a difference between what I was hoping and what I was expecting, right? I mean, but the one thing I knew I could control is my own humility. And no matter what you said, I determined before I got there, no matter what you said, I wasn't going to take it personally. I was going to try to listen and just be a learner, not a critic, like, and not be defensive and not go, okay, that was 600 years ago. What you know, like none of that. I was just going to just listen and just, you know, hopefully in a good way, assume that if you are feeling it, that it's real and that it matters.
Absolutely.
Because I think one of the hardest things is, I mean, I can at least speak for a white person. I think one of the hardest things is that we chalk up racism to an individual behavior. And so I think, I don't know if this is true, I think I'm a pretty good person. So therefore, this isn't my thing. Somebody else is being racist and they should stop. And if you have a problem, it's probably a valid problem, but it's not with me, it's with some other person.
Right.
Yeah.
So don't be mad at me about it. I didn't do anything. But the reality is that that's a very simplistic view, right? Because it's easy to say we know an individual story that kind of counteracts the narrative. But just because one person's story doesn't look like the stereotype doesn't mean that there isn't a bigger narrative happening.
Right. And I think that's the point of really, I think, even understanding the differences between, prejudice and discrimination and racism, instead of just jumbling them all together.
Yeah.
I think it's really key to know what each one actually means and how there can be prejudice on both sides.
I think that's when it becomes a systemic deal, because the emotions are the same, whether it's prejudice, discrimination, racism. It triggers that same feeling, that same emotion, and you don't take the time to dig through it and see why, that's the view or that's the perspective. And I think that's what makes it, you got to get down to the nasty bits of each category, which is tough. It's hard.
All right, are you guys done asking me questions? Okay. I wish, I think halfway through this, I mean, we started meeting in August, if I remember, something like that. I mean, August, September, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So we've got a long time. We got 9 months of relationship together. And I've told you this, and I tell people all the time, they ask me about this group. It's so funny, man. The first time I met with you guys, it took a week before about 40 people asked me about it. And I didn't talk about it. Like, I didn't put it on social media. I didn't say, look what I'm meeting with these black men. And they didn't try to hurt me. Like, I mean, like I didn't even talk about it. But it was amazing how many people found out about it.
Yeah.
Maybe that was unusual, or maybe they thought it was weird, or maybe they thought, maybe I should do that too. I don't know what caused that to happen. But it was really interesting how many people were asking about it, which made me think maybe this is a good thing. And of course, we had no idea kind of where things were heading in the country, right?
Yeah.
And I told you guys, maybe, I don't know, we talk all the time, the text thread. If somebody has an iPhone, they can give William, because you're green texting and all that.
Offering for William.
Yeah, man, we had a love offering for William on iPhone. Yeah, Android, it's so annoying. In fact, if somebody wants to replace you in the group, we can do that. No, but no, I think in our texting back and forth, we were talking about
That's prejudice.
Yeah, it is.
I was just thinking, like, man, hold on. Time out. We got to call it out when we see it. That's prejudice.
you have an iPhone.
Yeah, that's me.
So do you.
We're talking about you.
Okay, all right. It's not a white-black thing. It's just, it's
No,
an
it's an
Apple. It's a
Apple,
good, better thing.
Yeah,
it's
a
an
prejudice
iPhone,
to Apple.
Android thing. Okay, whatever. So we were texting, though, I think during the week about this. We're always texting about stuff together. And I just remember saying to you guys that how much my perspective has shifted, because now when I see things, I don't wonder how valid it is. When I see things, my first instinct is, I wonder how you guys feel. Which is I think that's an important shift for like white America to make.
But that's how it has to be. That's how it always is. It's the reason why when you first buy a car, right? I mean, nobody has the car. You go on the lot, you see the color you want, you're like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be so just phenomenal in my driveway. And when you're way home, you see 15 of the exact same cars, same color, and you're like, what? Did everyone just leave the same sales guy? What just happened?
Yeah.
But there's an awareness because of the fact that you're there. And now what's happened is over 9 months of, actually, to your point, with the empathy and all that sort of, my bad, John.
Laughing about, what are you laughing about?
To your point.
Somebody said don't say that, so.
Somebody gonna make that a drinking game. That's
But after 9 months of actually being interested in something that's not your experience, then it just opens up your awareness to it. And now all of a sudden, things that have always been going on, you even said it, that you were surprised when we were like, boom, boom, boom. We listed all these different things happening. You were like, I didn't even know that stuff was going on.
Yeah.
It's not that you were a bad person. They're just, because there wasn't an embracement of other stuff, intentional, you just weren't aware of it.
It's like the
and
gift
now
and the
you
curse,
become
though.
aware of it, and then all of a sudden you start to see it, you start to notice it, you start, when you're seeing something in a store, you're seeing something in the street, it's just the self-awareness, and that's when we can actually be the human race of Jesus followers.
I can't remember if I said this last time, but it was so unbelievable when we first met. The very first time we sat down, you all walked in and hugged, because we weren't in a pandemic, so we could still do that. You all hugged each other, and I remember thinking, dang, man, I asked you guys to bring people that So it would be diverse. You wouldn't know each other, you know. And I said, so you guys all know each other already? You all laughed. Yeah. And you said, oh, no, we don't. But there's a shared kinship.
I've learned about that. This past week, I learned there's a term called fictive kinship. And that started on slave ships. And African people weren't just African. You didn't speak African. You had hundreds of languages. So they had to find a way to communicate before they got to wherever they were going.
Wow.
And that's where that fictive kinship, you know, if you were from Ghana or Ivory Coast or Mali or...
Didn't matter.
Didn't matter, but you had to find a way to communicate, and that created that bond of brother and sister, because we had to be responsible for each other.
So that was one big learning for me that first meeting. There was a bunch, but that was a big one. The second one was, and you just said this, we're 3, 4, 5 minutes into just kind of getting to know each other, and you each started spouting out things that had happened in the last week or two. Rallies, a white supremacy thing, someone was killed, and I wasn't comfortable enough to say it yet with you guys. I had no idea that any of it had happened. I was completely oblivious.
Because you didn't have to.
Right.
I mean, we were talking about that. Just, you know, off camera, the fish in the water doesn't know he's in there until you pull him out. And once you get pulled out and you're flopping around and you're trying to make sense of stuff, that's when you realize like you kind of been in the Matrix, you know. But you don't have to worry about that stuff. So I'm not saying it's not your fault, but you don't know what you don't know, like we said last time.
Yeah.
But now you know.
I would hope that we would all show each other grace, and because all of us don't know what we don't know.
Right.
I think that the hard part is to show grace, and we have to try. But I struggle with this. When people don't know what they don't know, and they're not willing to investigate.
That's the key. Right.
Or not willing to show curiosity or interest, because I feel like that is so unloving. And when I watched the way Jesus behaved, he was uber interested in people and their story and their situation. And he wanted to help them and make it better. So for us, just to learn and be willing to admit, that's why I love the question that I asked to start, that is it possible that there's something I just don't know about? And it's not necessarily my fault that I don't know, but it is my fault if I'm unwilling to ask or consider, right? And so with that in mind, we're gonna start creeping towards we're gonna start walking across the pool a little bit if you guys don't mind. So here's the first kind of question I want to ask of you guys. And it seems a little silly or crass to start, but is racism still a real problem? Like really? And because I hear this from white people a lot, maybe you guys do too. I mean, black president, Oprah, Ben Carson, Herman Cain, the NBA, like, you know, black culture, what'd you say?
Candace Owens.
Black culture, black individuals. It seems to be a lot of celebration in that. It seems to be like, aren't we all kind of okay now? And not excusing the past, you know, but, you know, it was the past. And it doesn't seem to be as relevant today. I hear that all the time. So if it's relevant today, it would mean that you're still experiencing it.
Oh, for sure.
So, and this is kind of putting you on the spot, but do you mind sharing, because you've shared with me personally, but do you mind sharing about some of those experiences with racism?
I don't want to scare the people off. I don't want to scare them off, but all right. So the other day in the group, I said, how many, we were on Skype or Zoom or whatever, and I said, how many people in this meeting, and there were 5 of us and you, have been arrested? And 3 of the 5 people raised their hands, one of whom was me. And not just once.
And I sat there and I thought, what?
Turn his microphone off.
I had no idea. I mean, I never would have thought.
So,
which is even probably some version of racist or something. I never would have thought that.
But, okay. So I've been arrested 3 times in my life. I have no convictions. I've been in jail 3 times. Never stayed longer than an hour. The first time I got pulled over, it was in college. My senior year of college, I got pulled over from a ticket. I got a parking ticket my freshman year. Got pulled over on the way home, driving through West Virginia. And they pulled me over and they pulled me out, cuffed me, put me in a police car. I figure if I do all the right things, we'll realize this is a very small infraction. It wasn't violent, but took me to Mason County Jail in West Virginia Needless to say, nobody looked like me. My mom ended up calling up, and she called my roommate. He got money and came and bailed me out. Second time, I believe it was being questioned for a murder that took place.
Yeah, that's not a light thing.
It's not. It's not. Murder took place, and the fact that I was friends with a couple of the people who were suspected of said murder warranted me being taken in. So I got in and they asked me questions, and my mother was present because I was still, this was before the speeding issue or the traffic issue. So I was 16 years old, and they brought me in, and my mom sat there and they questioned me. Keep in mind, I'm a good student, I'm an athlete, never been in trouble. Another time I got pulled over, I just thought about this. My wife and I, we were dating, we were 16. We were driving back to her house at about 11 o'clock at night in Southern Maryland. I get pulled over for speeding, slightly, wasn't, you know. And in a matter of 10 minutes, we had 7 to 8 police cars. We had the county, we had the state, we had the city, and everybody was there just making sure everything was okay. My wife's mother...
And you weren't doing anything to escalate it? It was
nothing. She was asleep in the passenger seat.
And I asked because I think that's something that a lot of white people would ask. Like, yeah, but I mean, you did something.
Yeah, I pulled over. I showed her my license and my registration, and everybody showed up. Fortunately, my wife's mother was an attorney, and she popped up. We were like 2 miles away, and she laid into the cops that were there and said, you know, there's no reason for this many officers to be here right now. And they said, no, we were just talking. We hadn't seen each other in a while. Which, whatever. But I say that to say, I've been arrested here in our city, a mile away from my house, for being a suspected shoplifter.
Fit the description.
Fit the description. Mm-hmm. So at any moment, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking if I just, and these are the thoughts that go through your mind because...
Okay, hold on. Mm-hmm. I know this is white naive, but okay. When you get arrested as a shoplifter, it's because you have shoplifted.
Right. You should have items. You should have security footage.
What do you mean, like, suspected of shoplifting?
There was apparently somebody in the area who had hit up the Walmart on 92 and on Bells Fair. I happen to not look my age sometimes, I guess.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's the gift and a curse again. But they would rather, I think, they would rather be safe than sorry, even if that means you having to have an arrest record just to make sure that you get the right person. And that's how I think it works. But get in there, there's not enough evidence, but they said we still have to get everything squared away and shaken out. So yeah, again, everything was dropped. But that is
But they
a
still
record.
put you in cuffs and took you out.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they didn't just go back to the room.
Right.
Well, I've never been in the room, but they didn't go back to the room and go, hey, on the video, oh, nothing, it's fine, no big deal.
Straight to it.
And look and listen to what happens too with that is that there are people around.
Yes.
Whether they know Jason or not is not even the point. They see a black person getting arrested, getting put in the car, and again, boom, I just reinforced the fact that black people are here doing whatever, and he couldn't even do anything about it, right?
And to put that in perspective as well, on the way to the station, there were 2 officers. One says, do you sing at Woodstock City Church?
No way.
He did. I didn't answer. I was over it.
See, I think there's even the microaggressions, though, too. You know, those are the blatant ones that you feel slighted on. Mm-hmm. But it's the questions like, well, let me show you to the discount rack. Or let me take you to this side of the store. Or can I help you? Can I help you? Can I help you? Can I help? Well, you've asked me 4 times. I'm fine. I mean, I know what I'm doing. I got to know what I'm looking for. And I can afford what's on the rack. And even if I couldn't.
If I couldn't,
that's the most frustrating part. Because
the microaggressions.
And they do ask you. They ask me, how much money do you have in your account?
Yes.
When I was being arrested. How much money do you have? How much money do you have on your person? Do you have any cash? Just to make sure I had enough money to potentially buy whatever they thought I was stealing or going to steal.
Okay, William.
I thought that would have got me off.
Huh?
I thought that would have got me off, but they were like, nah.
So, I mean, you just talked about walking into stores, but you kind of talked about it hypothetically. Like, but has that happened to you?
It has, several times. And I even just tell you and I've made a running joke out of it now because you kind of have to have some levity in the situations. But I don't allow my wife to go out with just the kids to go grocery shopping by herself, all of them. And I very rarely go out myself with all the kids because I've been asked several times, are those all yours? Are they by the same mother? Especially when I tell them I was married at 18 or, I have 4 children and they're like, your kid's 17, you're only 36. And they try to do the math and they're like, well, are they all yours? So I don't want my wife going up by herself because I don't want them to think, where's that deadbeat dad? Because that's the question essentially they're posing when they ask me, are they all yours or by the same mother? And I don't want to go out by myself with the kids because I don't want them to say, oh, it must be his week with the kids. Oh, it's his time. Because I've been asked those things. And I don't legitimately asked. We travel a lot. And we've been asked, not a general curiosity or we really want to know how you do it, but we've been asked to our face, how in the world can you afford to do this? Like I want to, now I tell them I'm a basketball player, 5'10". I'm a professional basketball player, so because that's what they think anyway. I mean,
if you have money,
it has to be from athletics. It can't be that I've managed my money well, that I've prepared well financially, that I think my kids are that valuable that I need to spend time with them. Because if they did, they'd ask, man, what are you doing financially? Can you share some? You would think there would be a different type of a question in a different way that they're asked. Now, for me, it's the microaggression.
To be fair, sometimes they're right. I've been in business class going to Europe, and the guy next to me says, hey, so what do you do, sports or music?
Yep.
I'm like,
sports or music?
Sports or music. And I have to say music at that point because that's where I'm going. So I'm like, you got me.
But it doesn't always, I've been in business class too, and usually if I'm traveling, I'm in like a sweat outfit or whatever, and people just assume, okay, he's a sports guy. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I was an all-star high school player.
Al Bundy.
Sports or music? Sports?
I sing in the shower, but even when we're talking about stuff like microaggression, I mean, even, goodness gracious, you'd be surprised at the number of times where, I work in more corporate, and so when I'm on the phone with new clients and I'm talking to them, this is before nowadays where you have the Zoom and all that, but I'm on with new clients and I'm talking to them, and I may have been talking to these people for 2, 3, 4 months. And then finally I go and meet them and they're just like, well, who are you? And I'm like, no, we have a meeting at 2 o'clock. I'm Steve Riddick. They're like, you're Steve? And the undertone is, hold up, you sounded white. Whatever that means. You sound like you can actually, I've had people tell me, oh, you're so articulate. Oh, you're so smart. I'm like, am I smart because you know what school I went to? Because I don't remember having that conversation. Am I smart because you know my parents? I don't remember having that conversation either. No. And the bad thing about it is usually people, they don't think they're saying things. It just goes to that underlying microaggression
that's there
that now is coming out. Because what really happened is I made them come face to face, all of us, we made them come face to face with their stereotype. So either their stereotype is right, or we're causing them to say, uh-oh, everything that I've believed all this time is no longer the case. Right? I mean, goodness gracious, the neighborhood that I live in, here in Woodstock, right? It's a nice neighborhood, and until recently, I was the chairman of one of the committees. And the committee that I was responsible for, we're responsible for all the amenities and everything, the gym and all that sort of stuff. So I'm responsible for the gym. I'm the one that basically is responsible for making sure that the people, the checks are cut for the cleaners, that we get equipment in there. That's my responsibility. I go there because I work out a little bit. And so I go there and literally.
You want to throw that in?
Yeah.
Just throwing it in.
Yeah.
Just throwing it in.
I work out a little bit, but by the way, back to my story. Okay.
But so I went there. I remember the first time that I went to the gym, and again, I'm over it, but I went to the gym and a guy, he was just kind of looking at me while I was lifting weights. And because when you're in the gym, I'm not suited up in the gym, right? I mean, you're in gym clothes.
Hey, but
in fact,
in all fairness, he wears some crazy stuff. He
Well, yeah,
works on a do-rag.
I do have, I have like
headband.
my do-rag and
all
stuff.
fair
to kind of,
I want to be fair.
but so the guy comes to me and says, excuse me, sir, are you supposed to be in here? And I said, what do you mean? Is the gym closed? And of course, I'm just playing stupid now. Is the gym closed? Did the hours change? No, and he said, well, do you have your ID?
But you know exactly what's going on.
I know exactly.
Yes.
He's asking for my ID. There's so many other people in the gym. I mean, it's a smaller gym, so maybe there's probably 7 or 8 people that are there. But he pinpoints me out. Now, ironically, we're actually pretty cordial right now. And so I wouldn't call us friends, but he's an older gentleman. But we talk and all that sort of, if I see him in the neighborhood, we'll talk. But the fact that until, and in my case, because I get to the point where you start to say, you know what, it's almost not worth, it's not worth where I could go with this. I'd rather just, let me be the bigger person right now. And I actually said, yes, sir. I said, I do work, I am supposed to be here. I live here, and here's my ID. I actually got my ID and showed it to him. Did I have to? Of course not. But then when he saw that I had an ID, all of a sudden it's almost like the countenance changed, because now it wasn't black and white. It was, oh, well, he's part of the club. Yeah. And so now things can go, but it's that first reaction. It's that first reaction. It's the fact that he felt it okay to come talk to me. He felt it okay to come specifically single me out. And being that I even know, I wrote some of the rules for the gym. I know what's allowed to happen or not happen. There's no policing in the gym, right? Yeah. So it happens all the time. The microaggressions that are there, and people don't necessarily want to say it. To this day, if I asked him, hey, did you think that was racist? He'd say, no. There's just been so many, there's always a reason. There's just been so many people in the gym recently, and I knew something was wrong, and you weren't the first person I asked.
You can always throw the fit the description. I mean, some derivative of fit the description.
For sure.
Well, we've had that happen, or there was a series of break-ins, or you look like this, or, we just hadn't seen you before. You fit the description.
Yep. But before we leave this, I want to make a public service announcement right now and say that you should not say that a black person is well-spoken or articulate ever.
Indeed.
That is one thing to avoid. If we can educate anybody on anything, don't say that.
Yes. I've heard you all talk about how angry that makes you. And, I think I told you this, the very first time that got brought up, I said, that kind of sounds like a counseling issue for you more than a race issue.
What I call that is a compliment assault.
A compliment assault?
Yeah. You compliment me, but in a backhanded way. Because the bar for me is so low.
Well, and you've said, right, I think all of you have said that it feels like, and it feels like probably because this is where it's coming from with some people, most people, I don't know, comma, for a black man.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
You're really articulate for a black man. Yeah.
And it gets even better. I know many African American women who people tell them all the time, you're pretty for a black woman.
Yeah.
I've heard
You're handsome for a black man.
Yeah.
I mean, goodness gracious, I remember in high school, there was a lady there that I for whatever reason, our lockers were probably maybe 2 or 3 lockers away from each other, but she would like avoid me with the plague, like fear. It seems like would come over. We're in a high school, 1,600 people, 60 black people in the high school. There's not a lot there, and over the year, we finally actually started talking, and we had certain classes together and whatever. And she told me, she said she was actually scared of me, and I was like, well, why? I'd never done anything. And she said, and this is an affluent area. She said, because you're the first black person I've ever seen in person.
Oh my
Whoa.
goodness. Yeah.
What?
You gotta get out more.
But now we go deeper into, well, what does that mean? Because the narrative for black people that you see on the news, that you see on cops, that you see in all that sort, and I don't mean police officers, I mean
the
show
shows,
cops.
yeah.
You see in all that sort of stuff, the narrative is that black people are aggressive, that they're, and so she was legitimately scared, and that's where some of this, where you were asking about, do people not know, does racism still exist? It does, but I think that it's so embedded as part of the American experience that as a result, people just don't even know that they're doing it. They don't think twice about it, because it's to be American, there's some of these underlying things that have gone on for centuries that are just now so much part of what the American fabric is that it's hard to differentiate the two.
And I mean, if we're honest about it, it isn't even just that it's gone on for years. It was founded that way.
Right.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I mean,
at the signing, we talked about this, but it still blows my mind that at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin's slave boy, his assistant to keep him comfortable, was technically his brother-in-law. It was his wife's half-brother. So facts like that, just to put that in perspective, that's crazy. It blows my mind to think that you're signing a document stating that every man was created equal. Meanwhile, you have a family member who you don't acknowledge as 100%.
Not even a distant person who's black or treating differently.
No.
A family member.
Your wife's half-brother.
Who is not equal.
Right.
I do think that's a I mean, we're going to dig deep into that. Maybe we may not even get there in this conversation because we're only going to do an hour, but we're going to keep coming. We're going to do more of these. But yeah, the fact that it's a real tough thing to be able to say, sign a document, because it was a new thought even. I mean, it was revolutionary to say all men are created equal. At the same time, not all men are being treated equal. So we got to figure out a way to uphold a value and justify a behavior.
How do we justify it? We say they're not men.
Yeah.
Right.
They're property.
Right? So therefore, all men were created equal.
And treated equal.
And treated
And if
equal.
you're not a man, then
If you're a woman,
you're a dog
you're not a
or
man.
a black man.
You're a black
either
person,
way.
you're not a man. If you're, you know what I'm saying?
If
So
you can make
it
them
was that.
scary, I think that's what's still sticking. That's a part of our culture that we haven't been able to shake. If you can make the enslaved people or anybody who's subordinate to you seem like a threat to the people around you, and there's a threat that they will become the enslavers, then that's a constant concern. That's a constant, I guess, incentive to not treat them equally.
I've always heard that the most dangerous place for a man of color, a person of color, is in the imagination of the minds of a person who's not of color. It's what they think we may be, although we may not be. And to be honest, as black men, because we believe that people think that about us, those prejudices, those stereotypes, we do everything
out of your
we
way.
can
Absolutely.
to de-escalate, show the ID.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. No, sir. No hands in pockets. No hoodies on. I walk past cameras on purpose with receipts.
Yep.
I mean, I need them to see that I'm not doing what maybe you think I am.
You guys talked about this last time we met, that you feel that everything that you do represents every person of color, whereas everything that I do kind of represents me. You know, maybe my family, mom and dad, possibly, but then that's the extent. Like nobody has ever seen me get frustrated in a tennis match and think, well, all white people are bad attitudes with tennis.
I mean, I think that. I'm kidding.
So, wow.
We don't play tennis.
Where do you think
Serena Venus?
we don't play tennis?
You know, Wakanda forever?
Why do you think that those stereotypes exist anyway?
Well, that's why. You got to keep power. That's what we're talking about. They exist because they were publicized that way. When they tore down that statue, whatever, was it Jefferson Davis maybe? Whenever they tore it down, there was a newspaper in there from like 1920s or 30s. And it said in it, it was saying slavery is the best institution America could have, and we need to.
Wow.
I'm like, man, I'm sorry, this was 200 years ago when it went up.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. Though.
Right, and I'm like, that is what you were told, and it was law. It wasn't just, you can't hang out with those people because I don't like them. It's, you will go to jail if you hang out with those people, or worse.
So let's even get to, so one of the things that is interesting to me, you had mentioned about a lot of times people talk about Barack Obama and Oprah and all the people. Well, I think the easy way that the reason why it's so easy for so many people to think that it doesn't exist, it's twofold. One, when you have people like us, we have been trained and taught not to so publicize the stuff that's going on. When some things happen to me, because if I publicize it, that draws more stuff to it, and that could actually cause even bigger problems. So yes, I may tell William, I may tell Jason, or Ken or Jason, or whoever else, but I'm not gonna make this a big deal. It's not gonna go up on Facebook usually, and things like that. The second thing, though, is I think a lot of it is people think the reality is based on the circles that they walk in. And that becomes problematic because when you think about even just the three of us, you're talking about educated men, you're talking about men that of one wife, you're talking about men that are there for their kids, you're talking about men that have good jobs, so forth and so on. I could keep going on, Christians, so forth and so on, right? And so therefore it's so easy to say, well, hold up. All the black people I know that are in my circle, because think about it, based on socioeconomic factors, the only black people you're probably hanging with have those similar factors. So they've overcome, they've broken glass ceilings, they've stood on the shoulders of other people that have broken glass ceilings.
But they are the exception.
And they are the exception. And so what happens, they say, well, hold up. They say, Gavin, no, this isn't really happening. Look at the people that are on your Facebook Live.
Or sure, it happens occasionally.
Sure,
right?
correct. I mean, yeah, it happens to them every now and then, but the reality is they're seeing the exception and not the norm. we are, like I said, in my neighborhood, there's 3% African Americans in my neighborhood. There's about 1,500 houses there. 3% African American. I know it's small in your neighborhood as well. I just don't know the demographic.
Houses and one black family.
One black family out of 80 houses.
And that's us.
So there's a microcosm on people that are going out of their way to try to make sure that we don't fit the stereotype. And it seems like we made it. We got an opportunity, we made it. People don't necessarily know our story and know what things maybe we had to go through, but we've made it. And it can almost, because that's the circle that you're in, it can make it seem like, no, black people have the same opportunity.
Right.
Because look at Jason, look at William, look at Steve. And I'm saying, well, hold up, but look at the masses. Because when you look at the masses, you look at the amount of wealth that African Americans have versus Caucasians. You look at the amount of education. You look at the income, the job levels, the healthcare. Why is it that, you talk about COVID-19, it's more susceptible to people of color? A lot of that's because they're the ones that were on the front lines that were getting those $7, $8, $10, $12 an hour jobs.
Essential businesses.
They had to stay there, and so they were more exposed to it, where other people, they're working from home. And so it's things like that until you break out of your circle and actually say, hey, or get real with the people that are in your circle and really have some deep, like you have. I mean, I'm still surprised some of the conversations that we've had and we've kept having conversations, right? And you keep asking questions, and you're open with us, and we're open with you. But you have to go deeper, because if you look at it just at the surface, then you can look at us and say, okay, well, we're representative of all African Americans. And as much as I'd love that to be the case, it's just not true.
Yeah. But don't get it twisted. We didn't. Well, not all of us started there. Like,
Correct.
We didn't.
Correct.
I came from a black community.
Right.
It was the second largest middle-class black community in America, in Virginia. But growing up, once we moved to Maryland, it was still, we were underprivileged. This wasn't. We weren't. We knew what it was like to not know what dinner was going to be that night.
Correct.
I'm a McDonald's Circle project kid. We got government block cheese twice a month. Could not wait till we got that big block of cheese.
Man.
The milk and the eggs, the bread. I mean, it wasn't no name brand Nature's Own or Sara Lee. It was,
Yeah.
And for us,
3 days old, past the due date that it was supposed to be expired.
And we didn't necessarily have the government cheese. We looked like upper middle class, but I remember many months during the year where the month, there was more month than there was money.
More month than money.
I knew when my mom said we're having stir fry for dinner.
That's right.
That meant that
whatever you had left,
whatever they had, they were throwing it in.
Stirring and frying.
Exactly.
Right.
I knew don't ask to go to the movies because she don't have any money. I knew don't ask to go.
I ain't got it.
That's just the reality. And so even those that look like it, the reality is that it's still not necessarily the same as all of our counterparts.
Okay, so there are lots of white people who would say, yeah, I know. I had the cheese.
Absolutely.
I didn't go to the movie. Yep. There was more month than...
Focus on color with this, especially because most people are white in America right now. We, as black men, make up 6 to 7%, maybe. But we are just more visible. Now, we can look at it as class and not race, but I think we have to look at the weight of the past, and we have to look at what was that metaphor you were talking about? Monopoly? Who was talking about Monopoly?
Yeah.
Drop that.
So it's kind of like if you play Monopoly. I love Monopoly. I'm usually the banker, so I can cheat because I like to win. But my family don't like playing with me because I don't win because I'm gonna steal the money. But it's like if you got to play, if you and I, Gavin, as white Gavin, black William, got to play, and for the first 350 times around, I didn't get to collect my $200. I didn't get to collect my money.
You collected it.
Yeah, I collected, but I gave it all to you. So I went around. I went around 350 times, and you got to go, and you got all yours too. But everything I got for 350 turns, you got. And then for the next 50 turns, I could only buy stuff like Mediterranean, Baltic, and Continental on the left side of the board where it wasn't really much there.
Over there.
But you got Pennsylvania Avenue and Pacific and Park Place and Boardwalk. I mean, you got all those. And then you said, William, you got a chance too. Catch up, man. Catch up. Get where I'm at. But for 350 years, everything that I earned went to you. And then for 50 years of Jim Crow, after Jim Crow, desegregation, civil rights, the last 50 years, even then I was still redlined and told I could live in certain neighborhoods. That, you can all pull your bootstraps on and, you can go to college. But guess what? If I get student debt and you get student debt and we're all equal there, but then the employer says, I'm going to hire Chris and not Jamal. Yep. Well, here I am, a black man educated with student debt, and I can't catch up. So it's been the the cycle around the monopoly board for the last 401 years, where we've been trying to play catch up, and now we're told, well, that doesn't matter anymore. You're on the same playing field, but we're not.
No, we started, and some people break out.
Yeah.
And thank God for that, right?
So
the LeBrons, the whoever, some people get out.
So with the analogy, some people did land on Boardwalk, and that's awesome for that person. But it was a person,
Right.
Yeah.
not a group.
Right.
So here's the thing. I don't want to speak on behalf of all white people, okay, Woodstock white people. However, I think it's very easy to hear that analogy and disengage because you don't want to believe that it's true, or you so desperately don't want it to be true that you're not, and this is hard, you're not willing to really find out. Because if you find out that it's true, you have to do something about it. And it's easier to just stay in white, comfortable America than to get uncomfortable. I think I told you guys this. I'm so grateful that we had 9, 10 months or whatever leading into this conversations and what's happening around our country right now. But I have felt 2 very strong emotions around anger in the last 3 weeks. Part of that's a personality defect, but the emotion around anger, I'm angry that there are systems that are currently in place that are treating people unfairly. And we can label all the systems, we can get to that later, but I'm angry about that.
You should be.
But I am more angry, and you guys are so gracious to me about this, but I can't, it's just how I roll. I am more angry that it took 45, almost 46 years for me to realize the depth of the truth behind it, because it didn't affect me for 45 years. I've been able to live for 45 years in the comfort zone of racism. And so therefore, when I would see a protest, when I would see anger, frustration, or let's be honest, when I would hear the statistics or hear about the lineage of slavery and why that's a problem and all that, it's so easy as a white person to go, maybe. But I know William. I mean, he's fine. I mean, yeah, whatever. It's just so, because the hard thing, I mean, it was so hard. I mean, it's like the easiest person to lie to is ourselves. It is so easy for a white person. And if you're a white person watching, I know this is when you're like, okay, we're done. But don't, because it's so easy to discount or discredit that. Because if you can discount it, you don't have to admit that it's true. If you realize, and it's impossible, honestly, if we want to be intellectually honest, to not recognize the truth behind it, because there are thousands of studies that prove it from every angle, from every institution. It's not a group of black guys got together and ran a study and found out that, oh yeah, this is true. It's the Department of Justice, it's Pew Research, it's everybody.
Right. You know, the irony of that is that your anger comes from love. It comes from a place of love.
That is true.
You're gaining love for somebody else, for another group, or just another experience. And it's gonna make you angry at first. I mean, shoot, we walk around angry all the time.
Yes.
You know?
I thought about that. I thought I've been a lot more angry about this. And I think one of you guys told me, you were like, I mean, you were very kind about it. Obviously, you weren't trying to make fun of it, but it was almost like you didn't say it this way, but it almost felt like, well, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
We've been angry for a long time.
Yeah.
And by the way, angry because of what it's been doing to us. Not even doing anything to me right now, you know, but it still just makes me feel frustrated.
And I think one of the things that people then finally get to, like at least the stuff that I hear and read on various social media posts and things like that, is they say, okay, well, you know, just if you were, stop complaining about it and just do something about it. And I think we're examples of, hey, you're right. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here all my life in the fetal position and just wait for someone to give me reparations. No, I'm gonna go and do it. I'm gonna bust my tail. But if people just don't, if people don't understand the difficulties, and again, and here's, again, this is one of those slippery slopes, right? Because everyone has difficulties of some sort, right? Everyone has something that they overcame.
Yeah.
This is not discounting that Caucasian person who grew up in a single-family household whose parent didn't have anything and they went to school and it's not discounting any of that. You're right. kudos to them. I salute them. Hats off. But it's just saying there's just one more thing that they didn't have to think about.
Yeah, I read somewhere that it doesn't mean that you haven't had it hard. It just means that your skin color hasn't made it harder.
Correct.
Right.
That's exactly it.
And again, that is easy to discount as a white person. I think my encouragement for those of us that are white is to not be a critic of that idea, be a student first, and actually find out how much truth there is to it, and be willing in humility to admit that there just might be something going on that you don't know about, right? Okay, we got about 10 minutes because we always said we're going to promise to do an hour, which means that we're going to have to, because our dinner lasts 3 hours. So we're going to have to always come back, right? So we're going to come back. But William, a little bit earlier, you threw out a few words that I think it's easy to confuse them as one and to think that the words are all the same. They mean the same thing, right? So you said racism, prejudice, discrimination. I think those are the three you said. How are those aren't the same?
They are not.
How are they not the same? Maybe can we take it in reverse order for though?
Sure.
So let's talk about like prejudice first. Like what is prejudice?
You can take it.
It's just it's having an idea about a person, a group, and kind of lumping them together and associating that, and just essentially what the words are. If you break down the words to the root of pre and judge, it's the act, it's the state of being in prejudgment of someone or some group of people, and that goes both ways. And I think that's where people think, well, I don't believe that only white people can be prejudiced.
And it's making a decision out of ignorance.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Without knowing.
Right.
You don't know. You don't have that.
Well, if you judge, if you prejudge,
Right.
then you're
Exactly
doing
what
it
you're doing.
without information.
You're doing it backwards. Right.
Yeah. Well, and you guys have talked, I mean, I didn't know about this. You guys even have talked about within just the black community how much prejudice there is against each other.
Oh, my goodness. Oh,
Which
my
I didn't know, I had no idea that was true.
They used
Because
to-
no one in the white community, I don't think, I mean, I'm gonna speak on behalf of all white people, but I don't think people in the white community go, well, that person's more tan, that person's not as tan, that non-tan person's probably a little better. Like nobody in the white communities, I mean, we're trying to do the opposite, trying to get to.
Yeah, I was telling my wife that today. She's laying out on the deck. I said, look at you.
So there's prejudice. Obviously, there's white-black, there's black-white, but I mean, and you know what? There's prejudice from the white community. Yeah. There's socioeconomic prejudice. There are any number of versions of that. But it just means prejudging, right? And making assumptions based on really not facts or information, right?
Innocent or not so innocent, right? I mean, do all black people know how to dance? I know several black people who can't dance, right? I know several black people who can't, right? I mean, do all
white people can they not
women
jump?
drive? Can they
white
not
people not
drive?
jump?
Can they?
I mean,
things like that. I mean, it's.
You know me, I can jump.
Yeah, you can jump. I mean,
no, you're right though.
But it could be. It doesn't have to be so hardcore from a prejudice standpoint. It's just it's prejudging, right?
Yeah.
Do I look at the Asian American in the room and say, oh, they're probably the smartest person in this room? It's just prejudging.
They're really good at math, I bet.
Right.
But bad at driving.
Yeah. See? But the thing
that's
is,
the point.
Yes, and it's a
It's the
very
stereotype.
animalistic, right. And it's something that you hear, something that you're fed.
Right.
Culture feeds you that.
Correct.
So that's what we learn from as children. That's what we suck up. We aren't,
Yeah, and you know what? We don't have time to get to this, but it's interesting how much media plays into that.
Absolutely.
I mean, I didn't grow up being taught about stereotypes overtly, but every movie you watch, every music, I mean, all the things are teaching you something, right? So we do kind of grow up, with that being embedded, that stereotype. And you know what else? And there's brain science behind some of this too, because our brains are constantly working to survive, and everything we can do to reduce calorie burn is our brains will do it to make it easier for us. And it is easier to stereotype people into groups than to treat everybody individually. So therefore, I mean, it's almost a biological thing in us that we have to fight against, allowing our brains to drive the prejudice. Because it's just easier. It's just easier. So prejudice, prejudging, what about discrimination?
So now you're actually taking that prejudgment and performing some action. So if I think that all black people are always late, and we want to start at 7, I'm telling them we need to be here at 6 o'clock, right? Because it's like, no.
Otherwise,
Otherwise,
I do. Like, I don't feel like that's discrimination. I just think that's because we should start on time.
In all fairness, he's right.
But it's taking a prejudice and then
and actually putting
turning it
some
into
actions
to a behavior or an
That's
action.
correct. That's correct.
Okay. Okay, so racism. We've got 6-7 minutes.
Racism, any ism, you have to have, there has to be power there. You have to have some kind of power to make it ism. All right, socialism.
So here's what we're about to
fascism,
do. We're about to stand on the edge of the shallow
Like
end of the
the
pool,
slope.
and that little slope is right on our toes.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna tease out what it looks like to slide down it.
Okay.
And then we're gonna come back and talk about racism. And we're gonna come back and talk about systemic history, all that stuff. So let's tee that up for a minute, because we've been talking about this for months and months and months, right? I've been learning. So what is racism, and how is it different than prejudice or different than discrimination?
So racism is something you wield with power. Racism is when you can change someone else's trajectory based on your prejudice and discrimination. Like racism began, people thought Africans were slaves because they were black. Racism happened then. No, it was because the fact that racism existed, that slaves were African, right?
Say this again. That's a
All right,
really,
so-
that's deep. So I want to make sure we catch this.
So the cause and effect of it is that people believed that they were racist because they had racism because most slaves were African, right? But in actuality, it was the reverse. The fact that you created racism now made Africans slaves, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So it's cyclical.
It allowed for it to happen.
Exactly.
Because it takes power or authority.
And it made it an institution. It made it a thing. And it made it something that people benefited from a whole lot and continue to. So I think we have to look at racism and understand how serious that is. It's not somebody saying, you know, oh, look how dark you are, or you know, you aren't black, or whatever. That's not racism. That's mild. There's no repercussion there, no serious repercussion, unless you get punched in the face. But racism itself is a hard hole to dig out of because it comes from the top down.
I think that it's important that in all of these conversations, I mean, not just the ones that we're having, right, but the ones that are happening across our nation and in a way across the world right now, which I'm really grateful for, even though it's horribly difficult.
Right.
But I hope that we can move beyond. I hope we don't get frustrated with the difficulty and just put it behind us because it's uncomfortable.
I don't think we're going to be able to be honest. I don't think that's an option anymore.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of people that are now enlightened and they know better.
I just hope it doesn't become the fad of the time.
Right.
That once we get back out of COVID-19 and people have distractions again, and it just all of a sudden, it's not like it's highlighted right now, right?
But like
You
Gavin
have
said,
things,
it's not something you can unsee.
No. Oh, I agree with you there. But still, there's a difference between there's a difference between enlightenment and actual action, right? So the enlightenment is always there, but the enlightenment in and of itself doesn't stop things like systemic racism that is rooted into things. Someone has to actually take the torch and say, no, we're going to change that underlying thing. And we're seeing some of it now.
Yeah, it's happening every day.
Absolutely. I mean, even now, like I'm so grateful in my entire career, I've never, ever seen corporations that are coming out and doing things. I have schools in my hometown that are changing their names and mascots for all this. I see Confederate flags come down, and wow, I've never seen this
People
before.
Venmoing us money.
Real talk. But we'll get
Real
to that next time,
talk.
too. Real talk. But I think people are realizing you don't have to do poorly for me to do well.
Right.
And I think that in itself is
You
open a
said
lot
a
of
quote
doors.
about ships or
Oh, yeah, JFK.
Oh, yeah, when everything-
High tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do think that from what I have heard from you guys, and I think this is what you guys said, so if I'm wrong, fix it, that the fear that you have isn't that the Enlightenment won't continue, but that people will realize, or maybe, sorry, that people will be afraid that if they decide to do something about it, it will hurt them. And so I'm willing to help until it hurts me. But the reality is that helping move past racism not to be against it, but to become anti-racism doesn't hurt me as a white person. The studies actually show it would help me.
Of course.
That if I put you as a black man in a better position, it doesn't remove my good position. I don't have to share some of mine for you to have some. It elevates all of us if we can do that.
Right.
But it's fear that keeps us from actually doing it. Because can you guarantee that I'm not going to become uncomfortable? Can you guarantee that I'm not going to lose anything in this? Which, not to make this too spiritual, but I'm a pastor and this is a church, that's what we're called to do.
Exactly.
Like, we are called to use our advantage to give an advantage, not to use any advantage we have to further take advantage of others. But here's the sad part, I guess, is that we live in a broken, corrupt, greedy world.
Yeah.
So really quick on racism, because I think this is a really big deal. And so when we come back, and we've said this many times, like, we know this is way bigger than just black, white. We know it's bigger than just black men, white men. I mean, there's man, woman, there's Latino. I mean, it spans so many things. And so this is just where we're starting. And we want to continue to expand and continue to talk and learn and just be open to grow. But so to do that, I would love, because I don't know if we have a date for this again, but probably in about 2 weeks or so, we'll try to do this again, right? So I would love it if we all in those 2 weeks could suspend prejudging, suspend some prejudice on our own thinking, right? And actually dig a little deeper into how you guys talked about racism. Because if it's true that, and you've convinced me, and I've convinced myself through reading and education now, but this is all new learning for me, so that if racism is truly something that's driven by power, that means that the people in power are the one creating racism, which I think means the people in power have to be the ones that undo racism. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, notice in any grand movement that has happened to change anything has been the people in power that have done. Even now, the corporations are the people in power, and most Fortune 500 corporations aren't led by African Americans.
Right.
So the politicians are the people in power, and most politicians aren't African American or female or whatever, right? So it always comes somehow. That enlightenment has to turn into such a conviction and that anger that I'm going to fuel action to actually.
And the
make
beauty of it is, the vast majority of white people want the same thing that we do. And that's what's so frustrating. We're looking at this same shiny thing on the table, and we all want that thing. It's the same shiny. It's equality. It's civil rights. It's family. It's money. It's whatever. But we all want the same thing. We just have to figure out how to communicate that. And right now, we're seeing that in frustration and aggression and anger. And because there are a lot of people like you who just woke up. Like, man, I'm angry. Let's take it to the streets.
And the reality is, taking it to the streets is a reaction out of frustration. But it doesn't, and it does, I think, create a version of insight, or it elevates what might be happening. But for true change to happen, it has to go past that. So here's what I would love for us to do. First, I just want to tell you guys thank you. I genuinely, I love you guys, and I'm so grateful for the friendship more than anything, and your willingness to kind of hang and do this is so great. Two, I would love for all of us watching, all of us at Woodstock City who are engaging, I would just love for us to take a second and read a book, have some conversations, dig a little deeper, and the minute we bump into something that makes us say, instead of resisting it, lean into it for a minute. And just lean in enough until you can form an opinion that's fully informed. I think that would be a wonderful step. And then when we get back together, we are going to slide down the deep end of the pool, and we'll talk about the systemic stuff, history stuff, and I would love to hear your perspectives on those things, because I know you have them. You've told me about them, so, and you haven't been shy, which I love. So again, hey, so all right, thanks guys for joining us.
Thank you.
It has been really fun to hear you guys again. And for Woodstock City, thanks a lot too. We'll see you here in a couple of weeks.